there. This is Julie and Haley hanging out from Loveland Public Library, and we're super excited this afternoon. We have some gentlemen from Pop Culture Classroom, and they are going to be talking about board game design, everything nerdy. We handed out those activity bags in June. So if you have any questions or want to show off any of your designs for what board games you have created, we would love to see those. So without further ado, gentlemen, take it away.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Jorge. I am one of the outreach teachers here at Pop Culture Classroom. I've been with Pop Culture Classroom going on a year now, and yeah, it's great because I get to teach a lot of things. One of the things that I get to teach is board game design, and also lets me tap into all my other nerdy passions. So, and let me go ahead, introduce my colleague here, Eric.
Yeah, my name is Eric, and I'm also an instructor at Pop Culture Classroom. I've been working there for over 5 years now, and I would say I kind of specialize in board game design. I like to play board games a lot, and when I'm not teaching for them, I'm also a 4th grade classroom teacher, so I do that as well.
And I forgot to mention, outside of Pop Culture Classroom, I am a high school teacher. I am an art educator, so I teach art at our high school. So
he's your guy for art questions. Don't ask me.
All right, so let's go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. We'll have a neat little presentation for you. But first, when we're talking about board games, and I feel like, and Eric, correct me if I'm wrong, like I feel like board games have really like blown up in like the past like several years. What do you think?
Yeah, I totally agree. I remember 10 years ago, or even more like 15 years ago, when people would mention board games and you thought of, Monopoly, Sorry, and there are only a handful that people would really play, but they've really had a resurgence, I think, the last 10 years or so. And now it's really a common activity, and there's a lot of really high quality board games out now, and also lots of different kinds too. Whereas I think, 20 years ago it was a lot of them were roll and move based, very simple, straightforward mechanics. Now we have lots of different kinds, which we're going to talk to you about today.
Yeah, definitely. I've definitely seen, like, every time I go to Target, it feels like they have like their board game section like just grows and grows, or they're like rotating so many different games out. I mentioned previously to everyone here, I bought myself a Godzilla board game. Godzilla is one of my biggest like nerdy passions. So I was really surprised to see that, but I saw everywhere from, the Shining board game, Home Alone board game. Like there's tons of stuff out there now. So
they've even got a Kenny G, the saxophone player Kenny G has his own
I've
board game, and I
that.
saw that at Target the other day too.
I've seen that.
And you get like stuck in traffic, or your saxophone doesn't work too well. You have all these little problems you have to deal with. It's crazy.
That's awesome. Yeah, I remember seeing that. I was like, Kenny G. My dad used to listen to Kenny G. Wow.
That's right.
But all right, so let's go ahead and start talking about like what you need. What are the essentials for actually making a board game? So let me go ahead and share my screen here. Let me get that set up too. All right, so can we see everything?
Yeah, it looks good.
All right, cool. All right, so when we're thinking about just breaking it down to like vocab words and everything, what you need are your game design principles. And what's great about, designing board games is that this can be one of my passions. I went to school originally for game art. I was going to make video games. Didn't really work out. It was a lot of just sitting in the computer for me. So I wanted to do something a little more tangible. And I think this is where board games come in. But a lot of these game design principles can also apply to video games. So if you just like designing games in general, these game design principles will really help you out no matter what you end up doing. If you end up designing board games or designing video games, these will help you out. So there's 7 in total. So first will be mechanics, and I'll go over these in just a second, but I'll just introduce them right now. You got to have a goal in mind. You got to have your materials, especially with board games. You got to have something tangible to work with. Interactivity, we'll definitely be talking about this. Instructions, like you need a game board essentially Bible, because situations happen in a game and you need somewhere where to find the answers for those. Content is a little not tough to talk about, but it kind of goes hand in hand with the next one, aesthetic appeal, basically how your board game looks. So with that said, so those are our 7 game design principles, and we're going to go ahead and look at first we'll look at content and aesthetic appeal. And this is where I feel like it's always been a thing with board games, but I feel like in the past few years a lot of focus has been put on like making sure like some games stand out among the rest. I mean, you go to Target and you look at just shelves and shelves of board games, like odds are you're going to be drawn to like the kind that like has artwork that speaks to your style and things like that. So when we're talking about content, we're talking about like the theme of your game that can be tied to your goal. And throughout this presentation, I'll be using examples. So one of our examples, so for the game Clue, the whole theme of that game is that you're trying to solve a murder. It's a whodunit game. That drives a lot of what happens in the game. And the aesthetic appeal with that game is that, it's set in this kind of gothic kind of mansion with these crazy kind of characters. Each one's different than the other. Professor Plum, Colonel Mustard, Mrs. White, the maid, Miss Scarlet, the femme fatale. So that is so those things, that kind of setting, that's your content, and just the way that setting looks, that is your aesthetic appeal. And when you're thinking about board games, you want to stand out from the rest of everyone that's designing board games, because otherwise, who's going to play your game? Who's going to really be inspired to keep up with the rest of your mechanics and instructions and all that stuff? And a lot of games nowadays can take a kind of a historical fiction kind of approach. So this one right here, Splendor, is based on, when gem trading used to be a big thing. So there is that kind of aesthetic to it. I forget, Eric, what is Takenoko? I have it on here because its artwork is amazing, but I forget how the game's played.
Takenoko is not one that I've actually ever played. It
Okay.
looks cool though. I've played Splendor before. I haven't played Takenoko though.
but like Eric says, it looks cool. I mean, that artwork kind of just kind of grabs you and kind of speaks to you. So, and it looks like it's set, like just from the aesthetic of it, it looks like it's set in it looks like it's set in like feudal Japan. I mean, but games can also be set in an imaginary world. It just depends on what ideas you have. But the thing with content and aesthetic appeal is that they should engage the player on a visual level. So, but that's not always the case, but we'll talk about that later. Next one you're going to have your materials and instructions. And you'll notice I've kind of put 2 and 2 together with these 4. Materials and instructions, they go hand in hand. So those are kind of the nuts and bolts of your game. You need something physical to move around. So with Monopoly, you have your game pieces, you have the iron, you have the battleship, you have the, I can't remember all the rest of them, the lantern. But those are the physical materials you need to actually play your board game. So, and with that's important with board games because you're playing with actual people. So every person needs their own kind of tokens. They need their own cards. It just depends on how you have your game set up. And with your guys' packs that you get. I've only just noticed Kenny G.
Yeah, I just noticed that too.
That's awesome. Anyways, sorry. So you guys should have gotten your You guys should have gotten your pack from the library. Those are all your materials. That's all you guys got. Some, I have it down here. You guys got your foam core board, your dice, your spinner, your timer. This is more stuff than I didn't know what meeples were until I looked it up last night. I had no idea. So, but that's awesome. So you had wooden meeples, blank playing cards. That's important if you want to incorporate cards, and just plain markers. That's really all you need to have the start of a board game. That's a good way to create what's called a prototype. So it's not your finished board game. You haven't taken it to anybody and presented it to them so they can go ahead and start manufacturing it. But this stuff is good if you want to create your prototype. And then, of course, you got to have the instructions. So I think a lot of people are very familiar with the instructions of Monopoly. You know, you go around the board game, you pass go, you collect $200. Sometimes you'll land yourself in jail. Sometimes you'll get community chest. You're going around buying up properties, but that will all be in your instructions. And in your instructions, you should have quite a lot of detail. And you should be thinking about like certain like situations that are going to come up. So if you're playing your game and if you're play testing your game and something happens, you should have some sort of like reference point in your instructions to say what the players need to do when such and such happens. Now, sometimes instructions can be very, very simple. Sometimes they can be as detailed as, you know, the instructions from Monopoly. It just depends on what kind of game you're designing. Excuse me, I'll take a drink here.
And also, when you're designing your board game, there's different ways you can do it, but I think it generally works best if you do the instructions last, because as you're play testing your game and you're explaining it to people and you're designing it, and you're, you know, having people try it out and seeing, you know, what kind of situations they get in, that may change how you're going to explain to them how to play the game. So I think it's a lot of kids, as far as I've seen, their least favorite part of the game design is actually writing the instructions, but it's probably the most important, because if it's not clear, you know, what's going to happen in certain situations, people can get frustrated with a board game pretty quickly. So it's good to leave it to the last, leave it as one of the last steps of your game. It can be kind of fun though, because it's basically, you know, showing everybody like, this is how to make the game fun. You know, this is how to go through the game in a way that's going to be fair to everybody, and it's going to give you the most, you know, fun time you could possibly have.
Absolutely. That's very, very good, Eric. I mean, frustration, you kind of want to avoid that in your board game, especially if it's frustration against your the own rules of your board game, because you don't want people to be frustrated. You want them to interact, which we're about to talk about in just a second. You want them to be interacting with each other, but you also want them to have fun. But if people are getting frustrated, and I think we've all known those people who are just those poor sports and just don't really play games very well because they get frustrated. Well, that's what frustration looks like. It's not always the person, but it's not always the person's fault if they get frustrated. If the instructions aren't very well, not every board game is made the same. Not all the instructions are as detailed, so frustration can result. So yeah, we kind of want to avoid the frustration, because the whole point of a board game is you guys are killing time and you guys want to have fun together and you guys want to give yourselves something to do. Yes, the instructions are definitely important, and yes, I remember teaching this to an elementary class, and yeah, they were not about the instructions. They just wanted to create. They just wanted to get going and everything. But if other people are going to be enjoying your game, instructions are crucial. All right, so let's go ahead and move on here.
By the way, you're not sharing your screen, just so you know.
Oh.
So if you want people to see it, you're gonna have to reshare.
Huh.
I see it.
Tells me. Wait.
I do. Maybe I've.
If you choose, do you have your view correct? Like presenter view, upper right?
Upper right, I've got
maybe
full screen view options. I'm
Yeah,
viewing
it tells me
Jorge's
I'm
screen.
screen sharing.
Yeah, for
Julie,
some
do you
reason it
see
says
it?
to me that weird.
Huh. Okay.
Oh well,
See
as
his
long as
screen?
But
everybody else can see it,
Yeah,
okay.
we're good.
Oh, that sucks.
I
All
can
right.
see
Well,
it, and I'm the
all
one
right.
recording it, so it's okay.
It's
All
good.
right. We'll see. We'll see. All right. All right. So along with instructions, we kind of have a good segue point into mechanics. So mechanics are how the game functions turn by turn. So looking at Monopoly, you roll the dice, you move your pieces, and then you either buy your property that you land on, or you do whatever is that your space that you land on, whatever that space dictates. So, and then after that, that's one turn, and then you go to your next person, they do the same thing. At a certain point in Monopoly, before you roll the dice, you can decide to buy property, you can decide to get some change for money, or it's all part of the actual mechanics. So like I said, it can include all rolling the dice, drawing, playing cards, moving your characters. These are the mechanics. And those should be included in your instructions. But I want to really stress, like, the best mechanics really engage the player. The whole point of a board game is that you guys are giving yourself something to do. So you don't want a mechanic that has a lot of people just sitting around and just not really doing much of anything. You want something that's going to be, so if you're thinking about like those play rounds, those turns and everything, those turns should be not too long, but also not too short either. Like, you want to engage your players, you want to keep people interested in your game. And the whole point of mechanics is to add complexity and boost the participation of all your players. So from that, we'll get to like the two last important ones. I feel like they're the last important ones, and we'll probably discuss this later. Your goal. You need to have a goal in your game. So one of the trickiest things when I did this workshop with a whole bunch of elementary school kids, is like they didn't really understand like what the goal of their game was. And not understanding the goal of your game really kind of like cuts you off at the knees, because you don't know what you're designing for. You don't know how your game is going to be played and how the players are going to be interacting. What are they going to be doing? What's the point of your game? So with your goal, that's the end goal or way of winning the game. So if we go to something as simple as Tic Tac Toe, everyone's played Tic Tac Toe. The whole point is to get a line of 3 one way or another. Doesn't always work that way, but that is your goal. If we're looking at a game like Jenga, your goal is to remove as many pieces as you can around that tower without letting that tower topple. Otherwise, you're the one that loses the game. So it acts, your goal is meant to act as like motivation for your players. That's the whole point there. And if you have a good enough goal, it's going to drive a lot of the decisions that the players make. And again, it can be simple or it can be very complex. In Monopoly, you're collecting properties in order to build them up, as well as, sometimes you're collecting rent from people. That can get very complex, especially if you're like building up houses to get hotels and everything like that. Tic-tac-toe, it's as simple as possible. So, but your goal is really going to, again, drive the decisions of your player.
Even in a game like Monopoly, for example, the overall goal is pretty simple. It's to bankrupt all the other players, right? And get as much
Exactly.
money as you can. So goals are usually best kept pretty simple.
Mm-hmm. I mean, when you really think about it, the term monopoly, that's your goal right there. The definition of a monopoly is that you own everything and everyone has to come to you. So that's your goal right there. You want to achieve a monopoly over all the other players. Like I have this example, Yahtzee, that's one of your goals is, the game's Yahtzee, those 5 of a kind on those dice, but that is not the end goal. Like the end goal is to get the most points. And as you're rolling the dice, you figure out like what kind of points you want to take away from the dice that the points that the dice give you. So, but yeah, it can be very simple. It can be very complex, and like with Monopoly, it can include many mini goals within the game itself. So lastly, but I think this is along with the goal, I think this is the most important part of game board creation. You want to think about interactivity. You want to think about how the players are interacting with each other. What are the dynamics going on? Now, I think it's very cliche to say that Monopoly has definitely ruined relationships or friendships, because it can get pretty cutthroat, right? I mean, some people like ally themselves against or create alliances against other players. Like, hey, I'll give you this property, and we're gonna go ahead and take down that guy because look at him, he's only got $100 left, and I really want his properties. Like, that is interactivity, how the players interact with each other. And games can have players work against or with each other. So that's one thing I want to like stress with board game creation. You don't have to always have a board game where it's like you against everyone else. There's plenty of board games out there where you all are trying to achieve a common goal. Those are cooperative games. I played one Thanksgiving, I played a version of Oregon Trail. And, on the Oregon Trail, you guys are together. The whole point is to get to Oregon, preferably without contracting dysentery or dying. So as long as one of you makes it, you won the game. But if all of you died, you all lost. So that's an example of a cooperative game. Or it can be a solo game. But the whole point is this interactivity, this drives how the mechanics work. Or actually, no, scratch that, reverse it. The mechanics drive your interactivity. So the fact that you're able in Monopoly to, trade with other players and, create alliances if you want, that factors very, very much into the actual interactivity. And, there are those games where, out of nowhere, someone comes and just wins the game. Like, that's a fun game when you don't know how people are going to play with each other. When you have you guys ever seen a sitcom where they're having a card game and they're going to get the guy that doesn't know anything about cards, and they are basically just going to like fleece this guy of all his money and everything? That is interactivity. They all know the rules, but they're going to bring in this other guy that doesn't know the rules and take that to their advantage. That is technically interactivity. That's just the mechanics of cards and everything that drives that interactivity with those players. What do you think?
One thing that I think people should also keep in mind when you're designing your game is that you can have, like, especially board games today, they actually have some interactive elements that, for example, let a player skip a turn or just play a card at any time. I remember one game I played called Unstable Unicorns, and the players they would get these nay cards, and you could play them at any time. So just because it wasn't your turn didn't mean you had to wait. You could actually just throw in a nay card if you didn't want some player to use their super weapon against somebody else or something. You could just play that card. So keep in mind that your game doesn't have to be completely turn-based, and you can have special moves and abilities that increase your interactivity and let players work together to stop somebody or set up defenses for themselves or something like that.
I was trying to find the name of that game, so I'm glad you brought it up.
That's a good one, isn't it?
The one time I played it, that got vicious.
It's a very cutthroat game.
But it was vicious in a good, oddly, it sounds weird to say, it was vicious in a good and safe way.
Right.
Odds are you're probably going to talk with your friends after this. Like, I can't believe you nayed me that other. I was going to take him down. Like,
And then they had a
so,
super nay, which could negate that one, right? There was different
yeah,
levels of, right, and you could play those at any time.
yeah. It's just, but again, that he brings up a good point. That increases that interactivity. That also creates like an atmosphere. Is like anything can happen. And like this is totally unpredictable, and we're just gonna see how this plays out. So, yeah, I think when we're thinking about interactivity, I think that's probably one of the most important things when you're thinking about creating a game is how do you want your players actually like interacting with each other. Like, yeah. Just some other game design vocab for you guys. So there's modification. So I know it's probably tons of people, even families, have their own like modifications for just Monopoly. Like, oh, we're gonna play, but not with this rule. That is modifying something in the mechanics or the instructions in order to kind of make the game a little bit your own. Uh, and again, this can work with video games as well. People mod video games all the time. They either add like custom skins, they change something about the gameplay. That is, excuse me, that is a modification to the game. Advantages. So when we're talking about advantages, we're talking about something that's going to be beneficial to the player. So advantages in Monopoly: money, more properties, building those up to houses and hotels. Those give the player an advantage so that they're in a place to take money away from other players. Now, the opposite of that would be obstacles. This is something that makes it harder for the player to win the actual game. So when we're talking about obstacles in Monopoly, we're talking about landing on the go to jail space. That means you go to jail, you have to pay $50, or you wait your turn, or you roll the dice. There are other things like if you land on community chest or the chance box and it tells you you have to pay a tax, that takes away some of your money. Those are obstacles that make it a little harder to win the game. So that's other game. So that's it for like the game design principles as well as that other vocab.
One last one I think we could add to that would be a skin, because
Okay.
a skin is kind of like a mod in the sense that it changes the game. But a skin, for example, they have this for Monopoly. They have lots of different skins you can do.
Oh yeah.
Where it doesn't really change any of the core gameplay mechanics. It's the same game, but for example, it's set in a Star Wars universe instead of just you trying to be a billionaire or whatever. So a skin doesn't change the mechanics, but it will change the artwork especially, and some superficial like the pieces and things like that will be different with a different skin.
Yeah. And when we think about that, that ties directly to those game design principles: content and aesthetic appeal. Like,
Right.
I would I know at Pop Culture Classroom we have a Zelda Monopoly. Like, I love that because I'm a huge Zelda fan as well, and I see all the different locations on there. I'm like, I know where that is. I know where this is. Like,
Right.
that increases the aesthetic appeal for me as a player. All those different skin. Yeah, Monopoly is like notorious for having so many different versions out there. I think they have like some that are like even catered to like the state they're in.
Right. And when all the the thousands of people that are watching us right now, when they decide to make their game, it can be helpful to think of it as, well, I don't need to reinvent the wheel. I don't need to, for example, make another Monopoly, but I can change a few things, use some of the core mechanics from Monopoly, buying up real estate or trying to make someone go bankrupt, and just set it in a different universe, change it enough so that it's my own. And that way you've created a new game that people will probably like because it uses some of those really successful mechanics from an already successful game.
Yeah, awesome. So So Eric, what do you think are the most like important game design principles? I have my ideas, but like, what do you think someone needs? Just the bare bones, what they need to make a successful game.
I think probably one of the most important things is you need to have a solid idea for what kind of game you're going to create. And there's a few different, genres of games that you kind of have to decide between. I think one thing where I've seen people get into trouble when they're designing games is they try and do too much. They try and have, for example, a board game that also has, for example, I don't know, some kind of role play elements with like character cards and stuff like that. And things just get kind of lost, and it doesn't work because there's trying to do too much. So I think it's good to early on decide whether you want to have, for example, a roll and move game, or do you want to have, an area control game where you're trying to like buy up properties like in Monopoly, or do you want to have a card, like a deck building game, right, where you have different cards that you're all trying to collect, and then you get to use them against other players. So it's good to just choose, like, it's good to set and decide on one kind, core kind of game, and kind of work within that as your boundary. I think that's the most important one that I've seen, but It might be different for you. I don't know. What do you think?
Of course I have my own ideas. So I chose like the game design principles I think are the most, like, thinking about something simple as like Tic Tac Toe, something you only need like pencil and paper to play. The most important things, like, you need your goal, obviously. You need mechanics. You need to know how to play the game. You need which can go hand in hand with like instructions, and then you need that interactivity. Materials, like, you can figure out different ways to play tic-tac-toe. The content and aesthetic appeal, like, I think kind of come a little secondary, but can be added later, and it can be tweaked later as well. But those four: goal, mechanics, interactivity, instructions, like, especially that interactivity, I think that's the biggest thing. I mean, I know it's an adult game, Cards Against Humanity. Like, that's a very simple game with a simple goal, but it's the actual like content of the cards, which I won't go into any of that content right now with teens.
Yeah.
But although I'm sure they've played it, who knows? But it's the content of those cards. It's just how do you measure someone's sense of humor? How do you choose the best cards that person who's reading the cards is going to think is the best card? Like, there's that interactivity, and you just never know. It's just, you kind of have to figure that out. So I think interactivity is like one of the biggest things. Like, how do you, and you're right, there are times when games like just kind of throw everything at you. Like, you need to keep track of this, you need to keep track of that. I know I kind of shut off whenever I have to keep track of more than like several different things. I'm like, I don't have enough time for that. I barely have enough time to play a Switch game every now and then. But yeah, I think definitely you want a good idea. You want that interactivity. You want to make this fun for the people that are, partaking in this. What would our ladies say in the peanut gallery?
Any questions?
Yes. That's a good question. Like, have we had any questions?
Yeah, so I had a question.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Julie. You can go ahead.
Yeah. So you sit down, you have all of this information, you have this packet that we've given you, and you're just feeling overwhelmed. Where would you guys start? Like, how would you find inspiration for your game?
Well, that's a great question. And I think that's where, a lot of people are probably right now. I think one of the first things you want to do is just find something that you're passionate about and use that as inspiration. So, for example, if you really like the series, I don't know, The Walking Dead or something like that, maybe you want to do a zombie themed game. And then once you have that, sometimes, you know, a world like that will lead itself to, you know, different things. Like maybe I could make a really cool roll and move game, right, where I'm moving around a board and I've got, you know, for example, different hazard cards that I have to deal, like, you know, a pack of wild zombies, or I don't know, running out of food and things like that. And usually that'll kind of get you inspired to create your game. So I think just picking something you're passionate about or you're interested in, or whether that's Star Wars or science fiction or fantasy or whatever it is.
I was just going to say something about interactivity. I just recently heard about this game called Throw Burrito.
Yeah. I've tried
And
that. I've seen that.
like, I think there's something about interactivity that, like, not only are you like thinking about what you want people to be talking about during the game and what they're physically going to be moving on the table or whatever, but there's also like, what do you want them physically to be doing? Are you wanting them to stand, or are you wanting them to chuck something at the other person? Like, so I personally like that interactivity piece as an important part of the game, but I do like the idea of starting with basic things that you love. Like, I know Julie loves cats, so I feel like her and I should develop a cat board game. And there are probably plenty of cat board games, but not as good as ours, I'm sure.
Exploding Kittens, yeah.
Well, yeah, Exploding Kittens. Hello, the most obvious one.
Yep.
Jeez. Same guys that did Throw Burrito. This is Exploding Kittens.
Yep.
Anyway,
Guy from
those are my
Ethiopia.
very important
That guy's
points
awesome.
I wanted to share.
That's great. That's a good point too. Like, I mean, I even hear that love of cats, and I'm thinking about, you know, what's one of the hardest things to do with cats? Probably get their attention. So what if you created a game where you're like trying to get their attention, and you like draw cards, didn't get his attention, or you're like 5 points away from their attention. Like, it really does boil down to like, what do you love? What do you love doing? Or looking around like life right now, like there's a lot of crazy stuff going on. So what can you gamify in your life? What are some of those? And don't be afraid to look to history. History has a lot of interesting, again, like the game Splendor looks at like the gem trading that used to go on a lot. I've seen games based on like pirates, or a lot of like medieval like inspired games. Like, these are all based on history, so you don't have to create your own world, although you also have that option as well of creating your own world and figuring out what the rules of that world are. So I think Eric makes a good point. What is it you love, and what can you use to create your own game ideas?
Right. For example, if I was going to design a game centered around the idea of cats, well, some people have, you know, way too many of them, and they're kind of crazy, right? So you could have like a crazy cat lady design game or something like that, where you are, you know, set out to collect as many cats as you possibly can. And I just designed, if you see my screen, I just designed the board for this, right? So it's going to be on a square board. It's going to be the crazy cat lady game, and you're going to start somewhere down here. And of course, early on in the game design, you want to think of, well, what's my goal going to be? So that's something you definitely want to decide. So if you're a crazy cat lady, you know, more than anything, you just want to collect as many cats as you can, or more, or collect 50 cats, let's say, something like that. And then you're going to have, you know, different squares that go, you know, you start here, and you're going to decide, well, let's have the player move this way. And you're going to have different, you know, hazards and bonuses. So you might want to start working on your list of hazards, or we call them obstacles earlier, right? So obstacles. Yeah. And advantages, right? So you're going to have different cards, you know, that'll have different obstacles. Like maybe you lose a cat.
Or one of them runs away, or something.
Yeah, or a cat runs away, right? And these can be the cards that, you know, we'll have certain squares where it says draw a card, and then you'll have, you know, cat runs, away. And then your advantages stack's going to have, different things, like maybe you lure a cat into your yard, with some food or something like that, and you get a new one. So lure. But I think going through this process, right, where you take your ideas and just kind of brainstorm and map out where the boards, what the board's going to look like. Maybe I want to do a shortcut here so that people can, skip some squares, and then maybe I want to, have some cards that let players kind of sabotage each other or something like that, But actually, just going through the process of mapping that out really will help you make your game, because you won't waste time making something that later you realize, oh, I can't use this because it doesn't work with my mechanics or something like that.
And just kind of want to point out to all our millions out there, like, notice when he was doing that sketch, like that was basically a Monopoly board game right there. It's
Right.
just, you changed it up. Like, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can start, take some of the board games you already have and maybe even some of the board games like you really like. Think about, like, what do you like about this game? What are the things that make this game fun for you? And is there a way you can include that particular element into your own game? And yeah, I can't, as an art educator, I can't stress enough with the brainstorming. You got to start with an idea, but you got to put it down on paper and then see what works. You got to have like a experimental kind of philosophy with creating games, because when we're talking about video games, a lot of money is spent to play test these games to make sure like millions are going to enjoy this game. Same thing with your own board game. When you figure out your board game, get your brother, get your sister or your mom or your dad and have them test it out and see how it goes, get their feedback, and then adjust and tweak from there. Something I want to point out too, and I know it's like hard to do, we're all trying to, be safe and everything like that, but if you're able to talk with your friends, like, collaborate with your friends, share your ideas, like, even just off, just these 4 people sitting in front of you right now, we came up with the beginnings of it. I actually kind of want to like develop that game now. Like, so, but
yeah, me too.
Yeah. My wife would definitely play it. We've got 4 cats at home, so yeah, she would definitely play it. But yeah, try to collaborate when you can. Share your ideas, because odds are someone else has a way to build on those ideas.
Are there any other questions from our thousands of fans out there?
I just want to say I really like the idea of like trying to get someone's attention. So Haley, I know you do that at the library all the time with me. So if you could just develop a game where you're trying to get my attention, I would really enjoy that.
Yeah, humor is a great way to get people, interested in invest. Like, a lot of the most popular games, they have this kind of this humor to them that really draws you into it, like Exploding Kittens or Unstable Unicorns, or even that Kenny G game. It's some things are just hilarious because you don't think of that as being. A lot of times, I think people think that, oh yeah, the game needs to be really serious. You have to have like dungeons and has to be dark and people get killed and stuff. But a lot of times, some of the best games are just really wacky and weird, like Cards Against Humanity, for example. Those kind of games.
Mm-hmm. Humor is a very big thing, and again, like, we're trying to play a board game in order to just have a little bit of an escape, so it's even great if that escape is just so, and in fact, like, I feel like the sillier, like, the better. Like, so elementary kids are fantastic at this. I'm pretty sure, Eric, you can attest to this. Like, some of the ideas they come up with,
plenty of ideas. There's never a shortage of ideas. Just like, how do we bring those into a game that's going to actually, work and be fun to play?
Yeah, exactly. So, and also thinking out of the box. So the whole, like, getting the attention, when Haley, you shook yourself around, like, maybe there is that physical aspect to your game. Maybe you do want, like, maybe in the Crazy Cat Lady, you have to do like a certain gesture to get the cat's attention, and everyone like grades like your gesture, and you know that, like, you know, the scale of one, although, you know, I don't know, like I don't know, that depends. Again, that's part of the interactivity. That's part of like how you want your players to work with each other. I mean, how do you get your players to work with each other when they don't want to either? You know, there's ways that can happen too.
Yeah, I think most good games these days, they're not just like players working in isolation. You know, there's got to be some kind of interaction where, you know, you're working together sometimes, and other times you're working against each other, or you're all working together at the same time. But yeah, just a game where you're literally rolling the dice and moving around and nothing happens between the players is going to be kind of boring.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Any other questions that we can think about?
I know you guys were talking about what games you've been playing in quarantine, but what are your favorite games to play just in general?
For me, there's the one that I keep going back to that almost everybody seems to really like, is a game called Code Names. Has anybody played that?
No, I haven't.
So it's a really simple game where you just set out basically a grid of like 25 just random words, and you work with a partner who's on the other side of the field of cards, and you have to think of a way to make, like, some of those cards are yours and other ones are your opponents. And you have to think of a way to, like, to say, well, you can only say one word that's going to be a clue to get them to guess as many of your words as possible. So if it's like banana, papaya, and mango, you might say fruit, and then you say how many guesses you want them to make. So Codenames, it's really simple, but it's really fun, and you feel really good when you give a clue that was kind of abstract, but they're able to guess all of your words. It's really cool, and it helps you, I think, you know, get to know people better. It's a great icebreaker and a way to connect with people. So that's a good one, Codenames.
Before this pandemic and everything, you know, all our isolation, when I was doing game nights with my friends, like, we constantly, like, we always have a Switch, and we would have our, you guys ever played the Jackbox games on there?
Yeah.
Yeah, like, that's great because everyone's got a phone. You just go jackbox.tv, and, you know, you say you're up, you're playing the game, and you're doing what's on the screen. Some of my favorites were like one that really stands out. There's actually two that stand out. There was Trivia Murder Party on there. I just love the atmosphere of that one, just because, you know, it's you all are going in a haunted house and you guys are getting killed as you guys are answering trivia questions, but that's unpredictable because the loser that gets killed first could come out on top at the end. And there's another one, Guesspionage, where you're given, like, they took surveys of people on certain questions, and you have to figure out, like, the percentage of, like, how many people said this or how many people said that, and, like,
Okay.
depending on, like, the percentage would depend on, like, the points you get. I don't know. That was always interesting.
Kind of like Family Feud a little bit.
Yeah, kind of like that. So, but we, you know, we just go to the ones that just bring us all together, like, and that just have us laughing, really. Like, well, I mean, fun. That's the whole point of this, right? Like, we want to create something that's fun for everyone, and also something that maybe even brings out, like, a side of someone that you didn't think was even there. Like, with some of those, like,
social deduction games are really good for that.
Oh yeah.
Those are the ones where people have, for example, usually they have like a secret role or a secret goal they're trying to fulfill, and nobody knows who the good guys or the bad guys are, but you kind of figure it out through their actions.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to try and convince the other players that are on your side that, you know, these are the bad guys and we're the good guys. A good game for that is Avalon. It's a really good game but you need 5 or more players. That's the one limitation. It has to be for a bigger group, but it's really fun because you'll see people try really hard. Like lying is part of the game. It's kind of like Mafia a little bit, where you know that some people are good, some people are bad, but you're trying to use their actions and the way they vote and things like that to decide, well, is this guy on our side or not? So that's another really fun one. Avalon.
Awesome. I only just thought about like another one we've played a lot is Sushi Go. It's just
Okay, yeah, I
it's
played
just
that.
I love the artwork. It's just so dark. The sushis are just so cute, and there's so many different ways you can win that game. You can choose to, you know, get all your maki rolls. You can choose. You just pick and choose, and I don't know. It's a very simple game when everyone knows how to play it. It's kind of funny, like how quick it can go, and just
Yeah,
like
and quick, you know, simple artwork like that is fine for games too. Like this game called Munchkins. Like this is some
yeah.
of the artwork from it. It's not, you know, gonna win any awards, and it probably didn't take them too long to do it. But you know, if you can just develop kind of a simple style to your artwork, it's gonna be just fine. You know, even stick figures, if they're
Oh yeah.
memorable, can be a good, you know, so that can be your art. You know, you don't have to be as good as Jorge to create a game.
Well, I mean, Cyanide and Happiness guys have the Joking Hazard game like that.
Oh
That
yeah,
one's yeah. Oh, have you? Yeah,
I
it's
know.
where
I've seen a few of those. Yeah, they're crazy.
yeah. Oh, good lord, you guys are just trying to make your own comic panel, and yeah, those get pretty out there. All right. Well, we got 2 minutes left, so I mean, I think we've kind of addressed everything. I can't think of something we haven't addressed. I really hope all these kids are making their own games. I mean, that again, I like your guys's the packet that you gave them. That's more than I was able to give my kids at some time. So that's a good list to go off of. And again, never knew what meeples were until now. So
What are they?
they're just wooden little look them up, like they're actually
Okay.
like
Okay.
something you look up. They're just wooden little figures. So they started out being just little wooden figures of like people. So I don't know
Okay.
where the term meeple came from, Meeple,
Yeah, I
but
see
now
them
now
now.
they yeah now they make them all sorts of ways. So
They're
but that's
copyright.
perfect. Yeah, so that's perfect for tokens and everything like that. So I mean, I had my I had my elementary class take model magic, and make their own play pieces with that. So
Right.
yeah, so yeah, you guys definitely gave your library kids like a good set to work with. So there should be no like, I mean, as an art educator, the hardest thing is like the ideas. But again, like Eric said, if you find something that you guys are passionate about, or something that you can figure out how to make a game out of, like there's so many games out there, so many possibilities.
And if you want some more hands-on instruction, Pop Culture Classroom's doing a workshop on board game design from July 20th to the 24th.
Yes.
Which you can go to their website, Pop Culture Classroom, I think it's .org, and sign up for that, and that will be online too. So there'll be some guided practice every day of how to go through all those stages we talked about of designing your own game.
Mm-hmm. And if you're just to plug it, if you're worried about your art skills, we've also got a comic book camp coming up in about a little more than a week. So we've also got that. So we've got camps going on, and we really want to get you guys, getting your nerd on, essentially.
Awesome. Well, and just to plug the library, once we can all come back together again, we do have a large selection of board games that you can play in our teen hangout, which include Unstable Unicorns, Photosynthesis, some of those other really cool ones that you guys talked about. So we have those waiting for everyone when it's all safe to come back together again. Anything else? I just want to say thank you, gentlemen, for joining us, for all the fans out there who got so much out of this.
Yeah,
who will
thanks for
hopefully
having us.
And reference it later. But thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for sticking with us and for the questions, because I'm sure the viewers probably have similar questions to those as well.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And I just want to say, if anyone can figure out how to lure cats into their yard, please go ahead and email me, contact me. I'd love to know so I can start collecting them.
Right, as long as it's not illegal, I'll forward some of those ideas. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. Have a wonderful afternoon, and we'll keep in touch.
You too. Thanks, Julie and
Sounds
Haley.
good. Thank you so much.
Have a good one.